again, we are just continuing the general principles of contract. So today we'll discuss the area when an agreement is void. That is, especially section 23. We know in order to be a valid contract, there is a need of a lawful consideration and lawful object. So you have to see what are the circumstances by which the consideration or object becomes unlawful. So as we all know, what's the consideration? Of course, consideration is something in return. It should have some value in the eye of law. It's quid pro quo. So, consideration as well as the object of the contract, it should be lawful. But there are certain circumstances by which the consideration or the object is unlawful. That is, if the consideration and the object of a contract or an agreement, it is forbidden by law. If it is defeating the provisions of any law, or if it is fraudulent in nature, or if the consideration as well as object is causing some injury to the person or property of another, or if it is immoral or opposed to public policy. So these are the circumstances by which you could say that consideration is unlawful or object of the contract is unlawful. Consideration should be lawful. Then consideration object of the contract is void. There are certain circumstances. One is it is forbidden, fraudulent in nature or causing injury to the person or property of another, or if it is immoral or opposed to public policy. Suppose we could say a person who is an agent is offering a property to another. Property belongs to the principal, and he is offering that property as if it is his own property, without the knowledge and consent of the principal. Whether it is a lawful object, it is actually concealment of the fact. It's a fraudulent type of agreement. That means that particular contract or particular agreement is void. The object is unlawful, or the object is fraudulent in nature. So that is an illustration with respect to this consideration or the object which is unlawful. That is, an agent who is actually offering a property or showing some lease to the property. That lease, the property which he decided to lease actually belongs to the principal. And he has just offered that lease without the consent of the principal. So that was a fraudulent or concealment of the fact. So that's section 23. It states about this, consideration or the object which is unlawful in nature. And there are certain circumstances by which the consideration or the object of the contract is partly lawful and partly unlawful. So what is the after effect of that sort of agreement? That is, if the consideration as well as the object of the contract or the object of the agreement, what we call as actually, it's partly lawful, but it's partly unlawful. In such circumstances, the entire agreement is void. The agreement in whole is void. Simple example. For example, a person has offered a rice. Along with it, there was a transfer or sale of contraband articles or drugs. So it is partly lawful and partly unlawful. The entire agreement is void in nature. So that is actually stated under section 20. Then we'll move on to section 25, which is the very basis of this Indian Contract Act. As you have already know about the maxim ex nudo pacto non writer action. You might have heard it. An agreement without consideration is what? So we have already discussed that the essentials of the contract, one of the essentials is there should be a lawful consideration. So an agreement, if it is made without consideration, that agreement is what? So that is section 25 states, the ex nudo pacto non writer ratio. An agreement without consideration is what? But section 25 states 3 exemptions to this general rule. There are 3 exceptions that even if there is no consideration, that particular agreement is valid. An agreement that is arising out of natural love and affection. Another is an agreement with respect to compensating the past voluntary service. Third is time-barred debt. So these are the 3 exemptions to the general rule that an agreement without consideration is void. So the basic principle is where there is an agreement, there is a need of a lawful consideration. If there is no consideration, that particular agreement is void. But there are 3 instances where you could say that even if there is no consideration, that agreement is valid. That is, if a parent is transferring the property to his son, but that particular agreement, it should be returned. It should be registered. Then, even if there is no consideration, that agreement is valid because it arises out of natural love and affection. Another instance is suppose somebody's golden chain has been missing. Another person has traced it out. This person has not offered any reward, but he can compensate that person who have traced out that property, the lost property, for his past voluntary service, even if there is no consideration. So even if there is no consideration, compensation for the past voluntary service is valid in nature. Another instance is time-barred debt. As we all know, the case of debt, you have to file the case, or there is a limitation period is there. Within 3 years, you have to actually enforce it. Suppose a contract is entered between the parties and it's barred by limitation period, you cannot enforce it. But the parties, in writing, signed by them, have decided to pay the entire amount or partial amount. Then, even if there is no consideration, that particular agreement is valid. That is stated under section 25. That is, if a particular agreement is made between the parties, but that was barred by limitation, but even if that be so, the parties, they can enter into an agreement in writing signed by the parties that they've decided to pay the entire amount or partial amount. So, even if there is no consideration with respect to that particular agreement, that agreement is valid. So, the basic rule is an agreement without consideration is void. But there are certain circumstances by which, even if there is no consideration, agreement is valid. That is, one arising out of natural love and affection. Compensation for the past voluntary service. And third is a time-barred debt. But these, section 25 actually does not affect the gift. Okay, in the case of gift, there is no consideration as such, but section 25 does not affect a gift, donor or donee. And again, it is also not affecting the consideration which is inadequate. That I just explained. So you have to say section 25 It is not affecting a gift, even though there is no consideration. And it is also not affecting a consideration that is inadequate. Suppose a property worth 5 lakh rupees. There was an offer and promise and everything is there. But they have decided to sell the property for 3 lakh. So that is actually inadequate consideration. Even if the consideration is inadequate, that section 25, even though that is not void, it is valid. So if a particular contract or consideration in which the consideration is inadequate, that is a question of fact to be challenged before the court. If the inadequacy is after effect of a coercion, suppose a person is selling the property worth 5 lakh for 3 lakh, and if that particular contract has been entered as a result of coercion, pressure or force, or due to undue influence, then that can be challenged before the court. That is a question of fact to be decided by the court. Otherwise, it doesn't have any after effect. So that's an explanation to section 25. So section 25 says that it is not affecting the gift. It is not affecting the consideration that is inadequate. It's only questionable if it is challenged before the court, that if that inadequacy was the after effect of a coercion or undue influence, then only that challenge or that question arises. Otherwise, it is not having any sort of problem. Section 25 is not affecting the consideration which is inadequate. Next is section 26. Suppose I'm just offering my horse to Meera, and my demand is Meera should not marry in her lifetime. I am restraining her right to marriage. So such agreement they are what? So agreement restraining the right to marriage, the right of marriage, then that particular agreement is what?